Welcome to the Humanist Podcast. I'm your host, Ken Stearns. Join us on a journey where we unravel the intricacies of workplace dynamics. Good morning from Portland, Oregon, as beautiful, and from London, England, where Buki is my next guest. Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Ken Stearns, for the Humanist today. Great pre-chat with Buki. Just going through some of the funniest stories I think we're going to have coming up here, Buki. Really, really a pleasure to meet you and a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for taking your evening with us.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
I am too. So the Humanist is really it's kind of grown out of the JAR podcast, where I traveled around the country interviewing 330 people in 96 cities over the last couple of years. And this is really kind of, bringing that into the corporate table, using the JAR and using the JAR questions to kind of explore, what is it like to be a good human at the workplace? What are those attributes, and, the importance of being and doing the right thing at work. And especially for leaders, the value of that, letting your team develop, and supporting them, and flourishing at work. Companies that do this, companies that really build up their employees, perform so much better, and there's so much data around it. I encourage you to look at that. Go to shapepower.com, review how Shape measures flourishing. It's amazing stuff. So really excited about this kind of part of my experience, and getting people, Buki, like yourself on, that have been doing this for a while, kind of getting into corporate and talking about, sensitive stuff, and bringing it up to the conversation so we can all become better humans.
Yeah.
So Buki, tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us, how did you get, where were you, where have you been, and what are you doing here?
Yeah, well, I've been around the world, and I've been, so I'm the founder of Diversity Think Tank, right? And we're my focus and our focus is to equip organizations with strategies and skills, to navigate the inevitability of workplace bias. What I describe as the inevitability of unconscious workplace bias. Now, how I got to that, right?
Yes,
which is the question, right? How did I get to that, right? Is that about 23 years ago, probably 24 now, I founded a sales training practice, right? A consulting practice. And I was working with corporates, and I have been working with large organizations as a result of that for many, many years, and helping them increase productivity, effectiveness, and sales. And in that time, after about 10, 15 years into it, I started to see, just on my travels and what I was doing, organizations would always also have these kind of unconscious bias interventions or diversity training interventions.
Yes.
And so I thought, well, since I'm in the house, let me see what's going on, right? And I am kind of diverse. I was working in insurance, banking, asset management, a lot of professional services, also not just professional services, but a lot of them were. And that's normally, I'm a minority anyway, but I'm doubly a minority in those
You're
areas.
absolutely a double minority in the financial services, for sure.
Yeah. So I started,
especially 20 years ago. I mean, 20 years ago, for sure.
20 years ago, exactly.
For sure.
So I started to look at these courses and training, and they were good, but they just didn't really sit well with me. I thought that they were missing something. And this led me on a quest to work out, how to navigate bias, because I always used to think that they used to try and eradicate it. Yet we're all hardwired to be biased, right? Yeah. So they were kind of trying to eradicate bias. And I thought that wasn't right. It just didn't sit well with me. And so I started to write articles, write papers, and then we started to move into the whole George Floyd thing, which happened in the state, as you're aware of, right? And suddenly people grew this kind of massive, huge conscience about the disparities in opportunities for minorities and everyone else, and the rest of the world. And I felt that they were looking at it in the wrong way, right? I thought that they look at it traditionally. So that's where I came from. So traditionally, what I find is that when it comes to unconscious bias, and I should explain what unconscious bias is.
Yeah.
everybody knows, is conditioned views of a particular group or a people who are part of a particular group, right? It's a
Yes.
conditioned view based on that difference. So as a member of the majority, we tend to have, I'm not a member, but as members
Yeah.
of a majority, like a white majority, for example, tend to have conditioned views about minority because they don't see many of them, right?
Yes.
They tend to be driving the narrative based on what they see, right? And there's all these other things around systemic bias and all of these things. But when you have a conditioned view of people or a person because of the group that they're in, and you shortcut to that, you make decisions,
Yes.
and those decisions are detrimental to the career of the individual, then that's unconscious bias. It's negative unconscious bias, and it's career stifling, right? So traditional ways of remedying this problem, right, tend to have a one-way street view of the problem. That is, there are these people who look a certain way, walk and talk a certain way.
Yep.
They are the guilty perpetrators of bias, career stifling unconscious bias towards these other people who look a certain way, walk and talk a certain way. They
Yes.
by default are the guilty, are the hapless victim of the bias from these other people, right? And these other people tend to be the white majority, tend to be heterosexual, tend to be male, right?
Yes.
And then everybody else tends to be the hapless victim. And in order for the hapless victim's world and life to get better, these traditional guilty perpetrators need to change. They need to purge themselves of this original sin of
Yes.
unconscious bias decisions which hold back the minority. That's the traditional way.
It's
So
cool.
yeah, so by creating awareness that your condition, you have a negative conditioned view of black people, or you have a negative conditioned view of brown people, or of women, or of people with disabilities. If you as a white male can create awareness around that, then you can correct those negative conditionings. You can correct those biases, and then their life will be better. That's the model.
That's the model we're in. Yeah, that's the reality of what we're in.
Everybody's following. And
Yes.
I heard that, and I thought, no. I thought there's something not right about that. And I'll tell you how this happened, right? I'll just give an example.
Yeah, your
right?
like an aha moment.
Aha moment. Yeah, like
Yeah.
an aha moment, right? So when I was selling I told you I started with a sales training consultancy before starting the diversity think tank. I started with a sales training consultant. So I would go, when I started, right, I'm like this aggressive, in a nice way, but proactive sales guy, right? And I would go and see people, and sometimes I would sense bias, that they weren't happy, or they weren't used to seeing a black guy who was going to teach them how to sell their solution in their environment, right?
Right. And you probably didn't even sell in their environment either, right? So it's
no,
a double.
and I didn't sell in their environment.
It's double strange.
Like, who the hell is this guy?
Yes.
First of all, and he's a black guy. They don't do this kind of thing.
And he's
right?
confident. Like, what's wrong with him?
Guys, articulate, So I would sense this kind of bias, right? And so I'd think sometimes people wouldn't give me deals, right? And I'd think, oh, this is down to their bias because they were uncomfortable with me, right?
Okay.
Because of their negative conditioned view, right? But the problem, and sometimes I was right, but the problem is sometimes I was wrong. You see, what happened is that I would sense bias, right? And I would think, these guys, they're horrible. In fact, there was one story. I saw this guy, Chief Global Revenue Officer, right? Chief Revenue Officer of a global Fortune 500 company. So I went to see this guy, and we were like almost high-fiving in the office. It was like early in the morning. He was like, I love what you're doing. Your timing's impeccable. My global management team are going to be in England. Can you come here next week, do a proposal for us? So I'm like, yeah, sure, Mark, I'll do that, right? So I came back I came back to do the proposal. And Mark comes down, right, in the reception. And he's not the high five guy that I saw before. He's like cold. So I'm thinking, will the real Mark please stand up? Is this the guy that I
Yeah.
saw last week? Right? So anyway, he takes me up to his management team. And if he was cold in the reception, he's like ice, sub-zero when he introduced me to his management team. He's like, go on, present. So I'm like, here we go. So this is really important. So I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, here we go again. Another heterosexual, white, middle-class male, right, who's embarrassed to put me forward for a high-profile consulting opportunity. And I thought, well, anyway, it's just what a black guy has to go through in the West.
Yeah.
No big deal.
Soldier on.
I'm just going to just soldier on, do my presentation and everything. So I did, and with enthusiasm. And then I left. And I thought to myself, well, that's not going anywhere.
Yeah. That's dead.
That's dead. So I forgot about it. 2 weeks later, I get a call. It's Mark. He's like, Buki, how are you? I said, I'm fine. He said, how do you think it went? First of all, I'm thinking to myself, why did you send me an email? Why did you have to call me to rub salt in my wounds and tell me to go?
Right. How do you think it went before I tell you how badly
how do you think it went? Right. So he says to me, Buki, my team loved you. They loved you. It was like Monday, right? He said, can you get here on Wednesday? He said to me, can you get here on Wednesday? They want to start. They want to do everything that you said. Can you get here on Wednesday? He said, send me your first invoice. I'll get it paid now. Today. I'm like, never mind Wednesday. I'm there already, right? Right? And cut long story short, we got the deal, right? And there's a moral to that story, right? The question that I have for you, Ken, right? Based on what you heard so far, right? Who was biased in that situation? Mark or me?
Oh, a lot going. You could enough to pass around.
Right. Well, yeah. Well, who do you think was? I would say it was me because I
definitely
thought
you.
Because I sensed all this negative stuff towards me, right? But in reality, they actually loved me. And what transpired later on, what I found out later on, is that the reason why Mark was cold, right, is because he didn't want to influence his management team in their decision-making process, right? He wanted them to come to their own conclusion about who would be the best person to give this job to, because it was an informal tender, right? So he didn't want to influence them. So that's why he was a bit cold. But in reality, he loved what I was doing, and they came to that conclusion as well. So I was the perpetrator in that situation, and actually he was a victim. Right. So what I realized, this was my
crazy. What a crazy story, Buki.
Yeah. Do you get it? Do you get what I said?
100%.
Yeah. So the moral to me was that there are actually two forms of bias. There's directional bias, that's towards you because of your race and ethnicity, your gender, your physical ability, and so on, your age, and so on, or your religion, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's towards you. That's the one that we all know. Right. But there's also reverse bias. That is where you misinterpret unfavorable decisions as driven by bias towards you. And in that moment, when you misinterpret it, you become the perpetrator and the other person becomes the big victim.
Yeah, because you've labeled that part. You really labeled the guy.
You bang on the money, Ken. You've labeled them, right?
And
the question is, where does your labeling come from? Well, I'll tell you where it comes from. It comes from maybe past experience, something that bad that happened to you in the past.
Definitely going to be some real life experience.
It's a real life experience. It comes from maybe hearsay in your community, in your tribe, right?
Oh, yeah, other people's stories.
Right? And it comes from a wider narrative about that group.
Yeah, and the bigger narrative.
You shortcut to that, and in shortcutting to that, that becomes your bias, and they become the perpetrator. But all the training on unconscious bias in the workplace, right, doesn't allow for that. It just says that it's one way, that it's always one way, that it's always, I call it subscribing to the guilty perpetrator versus hapless victim model, right? There are these people, they are guilty by default, and there are these people who are hapless victims by default. But as I've just explained, as we've just seen, I can be just as biased as the other person. And the argument behind it is that, there are systemic biases and all of this kind of systemic isms, right?
Yes, yeah.
And that impacts that nullifies my ability as as a minority, or whatever my minority
Yeah.
is, but I'm an
Yeah.
ethnic
Whatever,
minority.
whatever
Yeah,
minority you belong to
yeah,
in that environment.
exactly. That
Yeah.
nullifies my ability to be biased toward the other person. But in the moment, in that moment, I can be as biased to you as much as you can be biased towards me. And so there's two forms of bias. So we have to
Mm.
equip people with skills to navigate the multi-directional nature of bias. But of course, you can't do that unless you accept it.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If you're carrying that around in your back pocket all the
Yeah,
time, right?
yeah,
A lens, maybe that you've got your glasses on. It's a lens through which you see stuff. You
exactly.
will always see it.
Exactly, exactly. And the problem is that the world is thrusting that down
Yeah,
thrusting
yeah,
that
even
down your
more
throat.
now, right, right, even more so now. So you really are you can have a victim mentality I mean, there's so many ways to have a victim mentality, um, how
Yeah,
stuff happens to us.
yeah. I mean, it's understandable. The reason why I thought Mark was biased towards me in that situation where I went for the business is because I think it happened to me before. So I thought, here we
Yeah,
go
yeah.
again.
Yes, yeah,
But I should judge him on his merits, not I should judge him independently. I can't judge him by what's happened before.
yeah,
And I can't bring 400 years of slavery to the table when I'm having a conversation about business. I can't bring the ills of the colonial empire to the table, right?
yeah,
I can't bring the suffragette movement to the table. Right? I've just got to deal with you on who you are. So I have to give you the benefit of the doubt, right? But we carry that baggage, and that impairs our vision. And if you don't say something I like, I shortcut to my negative conditioned view of you, right? And that impacts my behavior, my disposition.
yeah, interesting, this is when then you start to act differently.
Exactly. I start to act differently. And then you also,
I
here's the other thing,
Yes, yeah,
you
then
start to respond to
I'd
the
feed
way
off
I behave.
I'd feed off that for sure. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, I
And
would feel things getting weird.
exactly. And but here's the other thing, right? Right? I say it's a two-way street, right? You've got 50-50 chance. Every individual, when they're confronted with any form of bias, has a 50-50 chance of being part of the problem or part of the solution. You see, if you
Yeah,
sense
explain that.
okay, so if I sense bias from you, if I sense
Yes,
injustice, right, from you, right, in your behavior towards me, in your decision making, you didn't
yes,
shortlist me for a role. I'm just as good as those other guys, but you didn't shortlist me because I'm different, right? I sense that,
yes.
right? Right? I should call you out. Now we'll come on to how to do that, right? But I'm going to
It sounds that sounds super dangerous.
I should say something, but
Sure.
I never say anything, right? Here's the other thing. Let's say that you sense my misinterpretation of your behavior as driven by
Yes,
bias,
okay.
right?
Ooh.
So in other words, you sense my reverse bias, right?
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And you don't say anything because you don't want to seem unsympathetic to the equality cause. So you don't say anything. And you also don't want to be unconsciously gaslit by me. So you
Oh,
don't
I'm definitely not saying anything.
so like you don't talk, I don't talk. But what we both do, listen to this, because you should know you're an expert, right? So human nature is I won't tell you, but guess what? Right? I will tell somebody that I have psychological
Oh,
safety with. And guess what do you
yes.
think that person will look like if it's a race thing? What do you think that person will look like?
Oh, it's gonna be somebody that's like you. Same
Exactly.
experience. Yeah, you're gonna go back to your tribe.
Exactly, which is going to reinforce the bias about the majority. In this case, the
Yes.
white majority. It's going to reinforce the bias about the majority. But it gets worse because we're all the same. This is what people don't understand. We're all the same, right? You sense my misinterpretation. You sense my reverse bias, but you don't tell me either, right? We've just explained you don't tell me, right?
Oh, yeah.
But what you do, maybe 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, you could be in a conversation with somebody that you have psychological safety with. Guess what that person looks like?
Yes. Yeah,
What does
oh,
that person look like?
probably a white person.
A person be a white
Heterosexual.
person.
Yeah, heterosexual. It'd be a heterosexual male
Right?
as well.
Yeah. And then you might say to them, yeah, look, you know what? I'm really sympathetic with this kind of with the equality cause. But sometimes minorities, they sense bias when it's not there. And that person will say, yeah, that's happened to me before, right?
Yeah.
Which reinforces the bias about minorities having chips on their shoulder, right? Just like mine, when I told my person who looks like me, it reinforced the bias of white leaders, being perpetrators of bias to minorities. And never the twain shall meet. And you times that situation that I've just told you by like 10,000.
Yeah.
And what you realize is that you've got diversity and exclusion nightmare on your hands. Never mind inclusion. Does this make sense?
Oh, 100%. 100%. So
Yeah.
you wrote the book, I Don't Understand.
Hmm.
Finish the title. Great.
Navigating unconscious bias in the workplace. Yeah. Long one.
It is an interesting concept, right? When you think about it, it is really, the book almost is self-fulfilling, right? It's like the alternative title.
Yeah.
Could be that, avoiding that, that falling into that trap of letting your biases fulfill something.
Yeah.
Because you really could have done that with that example, the story, right? About you getting the contract. It
Yeah.
really could have fallen into it could have gone ugly for you, right? You could have really, instead of just going home, you could have taken action, right? You could have sent him a note and said, hey, I really, didn't, I thought we were really good buddies, and, I thought I really impressed you. And, I was a little taken back by your coldness. You could have riffed off a pretty naughty email.
Yeah, but here's the problem, right? I did riff off, but not to him. I riffed off to people who are comfortable with, right? And here's the thing, right? I think that we should call it out, but we don't know how to.
Yeah, I don't know
Nobody knows how to.
There's no way to write that email, Buki. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and you can't write. Why? You have to say writing it. We can't write the email, right?
No,
what
you
I
can't.
should, and the point is, when you sense bias, I'm advocating in my book, right, that you should always call it out. But the question is how?
How? Yeah, how?
How do you do that? And the way to do that, right, is to allow for your misinterpretation. Just allow for your So the question then becomes, well, how do you allow for your how do I?
Yeah, how do we do that?
How do we do that, right? And the way to do that is to use these 3 simple words. I don't understand.
Oh my goodness.
That's it. I don't. It's the purest. It's the most unscathed place you can come from. And when you turn that phrase into a question, as in "I don't understand," what happens is that you invoke our natural instinct to give direction. That is, the person will say, "What don't you understand?" Or they'll say, "I'll show you." Right? I'll explain. And in the process of explaining or explaining to you what you don't understand, right? Or in the process of elaborating or answering that phrase turn question, the bias calls itself out. Either their bias towards you or your bias towards them. So you don't need to say to them, you gave the job to him, you didn't give it to me. It'll just come out. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. I mean, Mark would have come to you and, you could have called him and said, I don't really understand why you were, you're 2 different people, et cetera, et cetera. And he would have said, oh, hey, Buki, I had to be super careful because I really liked you and I really liked your stuff. And I didn't want the team to feel that, right? I wanted them to be the ones to tell me, get that guy in here. And I'd be like, okay, let's do that.
Exactly. You're on the money. But here's the thing. And also that's exactly, you exactly. But the problem is, right, also, and a kind of added problem is that I think we should do it in the moment. Because in the workplace, you're not always going for a contract or a deal. But sometimes I sense bias because maybe, I don't know, maybe you don't give me a project. You don't give me a glamorous project. Right? But I never say anything then and there. But I think you should say it then and there. And this allows you to say it then and there. Right? And the problem is when you don't say something then and there, right? That's Gallup did some research and in the States, just the States alone. It said that bias-related disengagement cost the United States between $450 billion and $550 billion a year.
Yeah.
Right?
Damn.
And the inference is for you. and the inference is that it's disengagement by minorities and marginalized groups.
Yeah.
But I think it's disengagement from the majority too. Because when you sense my misinterpretation of your behavior and you don't call me out, that's a micro disengagement.
Yes.
When I sense bias from you, rightly or wrongly, and I don't call you out, that's a micro disengagement. The accumulation of those micro disengagements over 250 days creates mass disengagement. And let me tell you what that looks like. White leaders just don't talk to minorities, apart from signing off an expenses form or something.
Safer.
Right?
Just safer.
Yeah. And black guys don't really have a relationship, and women and minorities and disabled people don't really have a relationship with their boss. All because they never call out. They don't have the psychological safety. So what happens is that you get all these behavioral scientists who say, oh, yeah, we can create safe spaces so that these people can talk to someone that is safe, in a safe environment.
Yes.
But that's disengage. You're encouraging disengagement. Why can't I talk to you about it?
More tribal. Like, just let's go more tribal.
You're so on the money, Ken. That is so more tribal. Exactly. And it just reinforces the problem.
Yeah. Exactly. It binds the problem, right? It just makes it binds it together. And then, then you have the heterosexual white guys looking over going, oh yeah, now they got a whole union. They got a union. Now we got to really watch. I didn't even realize this stuff's getting out of control now. They're coming, they're coming after us.
Exactly. Exacerbates the problem. And then you get extremes.
So now don't ever talk. Yeah. Don't ever talk to anybody in that group alone. You better get a witness.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can't call. Nobody can do anything. So what if we could just call it out? So the biggest.
I like this idea is just ask for clarification. Maybe it's not calling it out, but just asking for some clarification. What's happening here, or what happened in our conversation or our engagement?
Exactly.
I felt this, or I thought this was what should be the natural next step, but this is what's going on. Can you help me I don't understand.
That's it. It's just as simple as that. Like, if you don't get a job, right? If you weren't shortlisted, you could just say, just for my own development.
Yes.
What was the criteria for that role?
Yeah. Or put it on yourself. I like putting it on myself. What could I have done differently? Or what do I need, for 2 years?
I wouldn't even say, what could I, because that's even, because I think we should approach these things from a resolution perspective.
Okay.
So resolution means you have some, whenever you sense bias, right?
Yes.
Negative bias towards you, you are absolutely, positively, definitely 100% correct. Always.
Okay.
You're always correct. The only problem is that the bias that you're sensing could be biased towards you, or it could be your bias towards the other person.
So there is bias.
Yeah, exactly. So what we need to do is determine, well, what is, there's bias here. I sense it, but it could be theirs towards me, but it could be mine. So let's say I don't get shortlisted for a role. I want to just understand what the criteria for the role is. So I'm not going to do that in an accusative tone because I don't know. So I just say, well, just for my own understanding, what was the criteria for this role?
Yes,
so the person's going to say to me, well, you needed X, Y, and Z. And I can say, yeah, but you know what? I've got X, Y, and Z, so I still don't understand. Could you tell me more?
Yes.
And the person can explain. And they'll keep, and if it still doesn't make sense, say I don't understand. And you'll keep doing that until you do understand, or the bias, which is unconscious, calls itself out. And it's either theirs towards you, yours towards them, or like you said, a bit of both. But it will call itself out.
Yeah.
But we don't do that. What I do is I go and tell my guy, and I say, yeah, these guys are trying to hold a brother down, don't want us to come up. And he goes, yeah, that happened to me.
Yes.
And that reinforces the bias about people that look like you. And then you go and tell someone, like, sometimes these guys, I get the whole inequality, but sometimes people sense it when not. Then the person says, yeah, that's happened to me. And you can't say anything. And that reinforces the bias. And never the twain shall meet.
If we just put the divide just gets bigger.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where we live. And the only people benefiting from this guilty perpetrator versus hapless victim model are speakers, authors, and trainers. I know I'm all of those, right? but I'm coming from a solution-oriented problem.
I love it. I wrote a book around this. I hope it doesn't go away too fast.
But
well,
I'm solution-oriented, not wallow in the problem-oriented.
You'll have another book out, how to even do it even better when we get to a new place, Buki. I do love that, though. It is kind of, be careful when you start asking those questions, because somebody might actually tell you the truth, right? They might say it's got nothing to do with your skin or what country you're from or your religion or your orientation. Actually, just kind of, you're not very good. You sunk. You flamed the interview, my friend.
That could, but hopefully, usually that guy's your superior, right? So they're gonna tell you in a good way. And,
they're a little bit more eloquent than I am.
Exactly. Yeah. FYI, that's one of the things I show people how to do. We teach people how to do. But it's a good point. That's what could be it. But
eventually you got to get to the truth. I think what your point of what happens in that conversation is you get to the truth.
Yeah.
Right. And then everybody can, once the truth is out, we can go from there, right? Once we have the real truth, everybody can work with the truth.
Yeah, exactly. And then we can collaboratively agree next step. And remember, we're talking now. I'm not talking to safe space person or a business resource group or whatever. I'm talking to my boss or whoever it is.
Yeah. And you're getting a better understanding of what's happening, a real appreciation for it. This is the thing, Buki, is we've lost the art of conversation. I think a lot of the stuff is we look inward and we look inward in a way, but project outward. I don't know if I'm articulating that the correct way, but we do end up projecting stuff onto other people. I guess that's the unconscious bias.
Yeah, and then and the problem is, right? I know I was saying who the only people that benefit are authors, consultants, and speakers, which I'm all three, right? And so are you, right? But right. But seriously speaking, there's I don't know if you're aware of this, but in the States, there's this woman. She wrote a book called White Fragility. Have you heard of it? Did you
I
hear
have
about
heard, yeah, I've heard that book.
Yeah, it's total nonsense, one. It's built on. It doesn't even make sense, right? And this, right? It's total nonsense.
But it's a really good title, I have to say.
It's such a marketing gold.
It's just gold.
She got us. She's the P.T. Barnum of race relations. She got us. She spun us.
Anything could be inside the covers, doesn't matter. The book, the title's great. No, I know it.
Because the title's amazing. You just want to buy the book and see what it's all about.
Yeah.
And 2 million copies later, she's laughing all the way to the bank. But my issue with it, right, is that the premise, the book's built on sand. I could go into the detail, and I don't really want to.
Okay.
But it's built on sand because it's basically saying that there are these people, like white people, become fragile when you talk to them about their when they're confronted with the inequalities, racial inequalities, right? But here's the reality of life. If you tell me something which paints me in a negative light, I'm gonna be fragile. If you say you black guy, you got a chip on your shoulder, I'm going to say, you damn right I got a chip on the shoulder. Never mind a chip on my shoulder. I got a boulder on my shoulder, and it should be a tree. You have no idea. And I go into one, right? Right? Isn't that the same fragility that a white person would have when you would say to them, oh, you're tied into a system designed to hold certain people back. So this concept of white fragility is nonsense, right?
Yeah.
What she's talking about, which is common to all human beings, right, is what I describe as defensive fragility. Defensive fragility. That is the number one obstacle to navigating any form of bias. That is the potential of the propensity for human beings to get upset when you paint them in a negative light.
Yeah.
It's not a white thing.
Yeah, you use a bit of stereotypes, you use a bit of facts, you mix it all together. There's some alchemy in there, and you're going to make people very defensive.
Of course.
Yeah.
So what do you call mine? Black fragility? I mean, I don't.
Yeah, you just pick a race, pick a country, and you and I could. I'm sure within 30 seconds we would have a table of contents and 4 chapters.
Exactly.
just Australians. I could, off to the races.
Yeah,
Japanese, Germans, French, British,
exactly.
probably a lot of the countries in Africa. We could we could go through it and paint. Give me a region, give me a region in a country, and we could go through history and find something.
Exactly.
Wow,
Exactly. So I think that people just, you hit the money, you hit it. You said earlier that, yeah, we're not talking, it's a communication. And I think
a lot for me. It's communication. A
we
lot
just
of
don't
this.
communicate. Yeah.
It happened. I have to say, Buki, it's really been an interesting for me as I was sharing about the journey with the jar, and I'm we're all filled with so many preconceptions, and from where when you for me it was one of the things that happened for me is I never really looked at the guests that I was interviewing. I had my team, my daughter actually mostly was running Facebook ads, and I'd be on the way to a city in a week or 2 weeks, and we would post an ad that said, "Be a guest on the jar." And people would see that ad and they would reply, and they would jump through a couple of automation emails. And once they got past that, then they'd get to my daughter and be a couple of quick questions. But my whole premise of the show was not to curate the list. I didn't want to
Right.
curate I didn't want to be, some Hollywood show where we were interviewing only the best guests with the biggest followings, et cetera. I interviewed whoever made it, who first come, first serve.
Wow.
So I got served up some pretty interesting people. You couldn't the walks of life, the stories, the kinds of people, and the places that I went
Mhm.
and interviewed people, halfway homes, people in really dire situations, um, even some dangerous, quote unquote, at night, I wouldn't want to be in that neighborhood. I can say that.
Wow.
Even and in the day, even the guy I'm with says, "Oh no, you're in the hood now." I was in
Too
Baltimore
late.
interviewing. I was interviewing one of a greatest guy. This guy was so much fun. Him and his wife, they brewed beer. We interviewed in the basement, but it was funny. He said, "Oh," I said, I said I drove through some rough looking neighborhoods getting here. And I said, I was glad I wasn't pulling up to one of those brownstones, one of the housing rows, right? Next to
Yeah.
the abandoned, like I was afraid the van wheels would be gone when I parked. And, so I was glad to get to this neighborhood. He said, "Oh no, you're in the hood, man. You haven't left the hood. You're still in the hood." He says, "Tonight, the AK-47s will be going off just over 2 streets
Gee.
over." And, so what I found was, we're all humans, right?
Yeah.
I could strip away all the color from all the people I met, and it really did teach me uh, to get past the looks and to get past the environment they were in, because all that
Yeah.
was also a bias, right? I had a bias against what street I was on, what the house looked like, what people looked like, what they wore, what kind of, you know, et cetera. Right, you name it,
Yeah.
right? All those they're all in there. We're all hardwired with them. I don't care what color you
Exactly.
are or what shape you are.
We all have
We all have these bias. So it's been an interesting journey to be able to be shown. I was given a gift in a way. I was given the gift of being able to pause those and put them outside of my mind.
And did you have people from all socioeconomic backgrounds as well?
Oh,
Every
I was in some beautiful homes, multi-million dollar homes,
Wow.
and I was in halfway houses where we were
Wow.
in their room, and they were hoping to get an apartment, and they were together.
Gee.
So some really interesting, phenomenal stuff. Let's do a question out of the jar real quick
Yeah.
before we get it. See where this takes us. Oh, so I'm pulling a question out of the jar. For some reason I want to go kind of deep. That your question's down here at the bottom.
Oh wow.
I got my
Okay.
finger on it. Oh, okay. So Buki, a question for you from the jar. Oh, interesting for you, especially a
Mhm.
career man like yourself.
Yeah.
If you could change careers tomorrow, what would you do?
Whoa. Jeez.
If you could change careers tomorrow, what would you do?
So this is like a really interesting question because I, you know what? I love what I do. I know this sounds like really corny. I, 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 I acting, maybe acting.
Interesting.
That's it. I
I could
love what I do. I just wouldn't change. I think I've been sent here to motivate positive change, right? And I think acting would be a good channel for that, an alternative channel.
I could very much see you as an actor.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, you got a good character, you got a good presence.
Next Denzel Washington,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, you got a different vibe from Denzel. But
yeah,
although he's played a lot of roles.
yeah,
I don't know. Yeah, I'm just trying to struggle with what I would see you as, the kind of like a villain or the hero
yeah.
or, or the um kind of
A bit of both.
the suave guy. I think a little bit of both, right? It
Yeah,
could be the hero villain or the villain
yeah,
hero. Maybe that would be a better because you're a change agent, right? I mean, your real life job that you
yeah,
said is to bring positive, this kind of positive. You're a change agent.
yeah, yeah. Exactly. That's good. Yeah, that's what. Yeah, I am a change agent. Yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah.
I don't want to say this. Is it an unwilling victim or a recruit? How would you position yourself if you are a change agent? Was this, are you the unwilling victim of this? Like it happened to you, or has it happened for you?
Again, another good question. I think I think it's a very interesting question. I think I think sometimes trouble is brought to us as a blessing in disguise,
Yes. Yes.
and I think yeah, when I sensed trouble, it was a blessing in disguise,
Yeah.
and when I sensed bias towards me, that definitely was a blessing in disguise. But when I learned to overcome it, the joy that I got from that, I was so overjoyed that I needed to share it. And I think, when I couldn't sell, when I was working for a consultancy and I was trying to
Yes.
sell, right? When I worked out how to, because we were doing cold call, when I learned how to get meetings,
Okay.
right? And then go out and close deals, right? When I mastered that art, I just couldn't wait to share it. I couldn't wait, and I I couldn't, and one of the biggest areas in when I was doing just sales training was that getting meetings. I've trained thousands, tens of thousands of people like that at doing that because I just want to share. I just wanted to share the joy. So, and the same here. When I worked out that there is a way of effectively navigating career stifling bias, I want to tell the whole world.
Yes.
So I guess you asked me, was I a victim of, or
Yeah. Or was it for you? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
was it
Did it
to me
happen
or
to
for me?
you or for you?
I think it happened to me for a bigger reason.
Yes.
That's how I like to look at it. I think it happened to me for a bigger, to help other people navigate this world, in particular bias, but in general.
And you really could have gone, you really could have taken this into a negative place, right? Had
Yeah,
you been a different person, that conversation could have gone a lot of different ways.
Ken, sometimes it did. It's so interesting you should say that. You talked about mental health. I had mental health problems. They just didn't call it that in those days, or they
Yeah.
didn't call it. Tell me.
Used to call it what Boogie. We just say, "Suck it up," right?
Yeah, we just say
Get
that
over it, suck it
this
up,
guy's
move
like
on.
upset. He's moving but I remember like 5 o'clock in the morning walking. I know you've been to London, Ken. Have you been to London?
Yeah, a few times.
So I remember I was walking. I think it was Victoria, one of these stations, one of these tube stations, right? And I was I was looking for a job, and I was sensing a lot of bias and racial bias. I was so frustrated. I had all this madness in my head, a lot of negative circular thinking. And it was early in the morning. I was going to an interview, and I just got frustrated, and I kicked the lift, the panel, right, on those escalator, on the escalator. I whacked it. There were only a few people awake at that time. They looked at me like, "What's the matter with this guy?" Right? Anyway, obviously I got over it because I wouldn't be here today, right? But I've now learned that that's actually, this was like, I had like some crazy mental health problem. The other thing I mean, maybe not as serious as some people, but my
Yeah, but
health, my mental health wasn't in the right place,
yes, you
right?
weren't in the right. Yeah, frame of mind was bad.
Yeah, and then I had like some kind of, I remember I had this kind of aggravated behavior towards me when I started my business, and it was race driven,
Okay.
and I never said anything. Now I don't actually think that my tactics would help with that, because that was kind of overt, conscious.
That's yeah,
That was
still a
that
real
was
thing.
that was racism, right?
Yeah.
So, and it was in a corporate setting, and I
Oof.
remember, and I didn't say anything to this guy, right? And you know what? For years, right? For years, I kept regretting, and I would have flashes of
If I'd
why
only
did
said, I could have
it's
said
like, why
this.
did I just like yell at this guy? Why did I like pull the tape, go crazy? I
Yeah.
didn't say anything. And I actually mentioned that story in my book. And then when I was writing my book, I just thought, well, I wonder what was happening to me. And I just I just checked if somebody that, and there's actually a name for it. So you have PTSD, right?
Yeah.
Right? Or right? So there's a race-based, it's called RBST, or race-based trauma syndrome, right? So I realized that that's what I had. That I kept having these flashbacks to that point. So yeah, I'm just saying that sometimes we go through these things and we don't realize, we just think that we're just, life isn't treating us well,
Mm.
and we're upset. But actually, these are mental health issues, and if they're not addressed, they can spiral, like you said, into something much bigger. It can get ugly. It can get really ugly.
If you ruminate on that stuff, it'll drag you. You end up in it's a memory,
Mm,
right? It's not a good memory, but it's because when you have an event where there's emotion, you create a memory.
exactly.
So so there's a lot. You had a big chemical dump, when that happened to you, right? You had a massive chemical dump into your body, and that gave you a memory, emotion, and that becomes kind of a dropping a pin in a moment of your timeline of life, like that dropping a pin on a map. Yeah, you
Yeah,
dropped a pin, and every
yeah.
time you
Because
go
you're
back
anchored.
to that, all that emotion just gets re-released, right? You feel you're actually literally back in that same moment. So we gotta have to learn to quickly let that crap go. Pull that pin and throw it in the trash,
Exactly.
and let that go, and just feel some sympathy for that idiot,
Yeah,
because this person's going through their whole life like this.
yeah.
I
You
mean,
know what? That's a really.
you
Go
can
on.
get
Sorry.
rid of it, right? I mean, you could get past it. He can't. I mean,
Yeah.
probably, right? Probably his whole life is gonna be this retarded.
It's such a good point, actually. When you look at it in that way and you feel sorry for the other person, it actually relieves you of the baggage.
Yeah, it's not you. It's
Yeah,
nothing to do
yeah,
with you, and it's that other person's problem, and you have to just look at them and just go, "Man, I feel sorry for you that, this is how you're gonna go through your life." 'Cause
exactly,
it's not just you, it's gonna be the person in the blue car. I mean,
yeah,
these are people who are simple-minded, right?
exactly,
It's not just you, it's never gonna be just a racial thing, it's everything, right?
exactly.
It's that company, it's this country,
Yeah,
people with, I don't know, brown hair,
yeah,
they'll have 100 things that they are so narrow-minded about in life.
yeah. You turn out to be like that guy. Did you see that movie, Falling Down? Michael Douglas, Falling Down,
Oh, yes.
and he
Yes.
just flipped. He just he
Yeah,
was just
so this is, and again, I have this from people I've interviewed. It is that thing where things happen for us,
yeah,
not to us. And
yeah,
that's something people taught me as I went through and met people. Everybody was on a positive road, and they had something a lot of stories was horrific stuff that happened to them. And the fact that they were able to find a new road, get a new map and a new pencil and a compass, and they're on, like, I'm on this new road and here's where I'm going.
yeah,
And this
yeah.
stuff happened in a way to me at
For
the
a reason.
time, but now I've changed the narrative, or they somehow were able to say, I would never change anything about my life. It got me here.
Yeah,
And I
Yeah.
thought, man, it's so powerful. And so many of the stories you hear, and you're like, this is how people, this is, I'm meeting evolved people. Like I'm interviewing people who are way more evolved than me.
Yeah.
They're, you learn so much about humanity when you get out and you talk to people. Right.
Yeah,
And you
I mean,
have
it
it.
takes a very high level of, maturity,
Yes.
spirituality to kind of transcend these things that you've gone
Yeah.
through, and see them as stepping stones for the evolved you.
Yes.
Not everybody can do that. It requires a lot of introspection, but distant introspection. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm sure those guys that you met are, incredible. But what I want to ask you, though, about that, right? So, did any of the people that you met have the kind of aha moment as a result, or in the moment with you when you were asking them these questions?
Oh, yeah. There are quite a few where, in that conversation, especially when we finished, I think
Yeah,
Buki is the because when they're in that moment, but there are people who when we finished and we wrapped it up,
yeah,
they just had that massive exhale.
yeah.
And, they're like, that was like a therapy session, but not a therapy. Like that was incredible. And, I can't wait to hear myself and hear what I said, because the questions come and they're pretty heavy, and people ask them what, we're answering these questions like this, one after another. And they're articulating things, Buki, that you think about. So all the questions in the jar are things we think about. There's
Right.
nothing in here you haven't had an mostly internal dialogue. And so, and they're disparate pieces in your brain or in your memory. And
Yes.
so when people, the jar process, we force people to go through and to collect those thoughts, these disparate pieces off these, off a hard drive, right? Like it's on that hard different, and they collect them. And then when it comes out of their mouth and they hear themselves speaking these thoughts for the first time articulated, because normally it's internal dialogue. So the fact that they express these, and it lets them see their life from a different view, like a different POV, like the point of view is totally different.
Yeah.
And they do, I think it's healed a few people, not healed them, but helped them close a chapter a lot of times
Wow.
on parts of their lives.
Well, that's great. So
Yes.
is that why I see the halo over your head?
Yeah, that's definitely not me.
Like-
That's all my own personal trauma, you know, my own PTSD from life. Uh,
But that's great. The fact that
yeah,
you've got people come to I think it's great. And I,
yeah,
I see it's so great, because I think just the energy the different energies that you would have
yeah.
met and been a part, just amazing.
I had a couple, energy's a real thing. I had, so much of that was uplifting, but I had a couple I had one dark one. It took me about 3 months to shed the energy from me,
Wow,
really like a dark soul
really?
and almost possessed. I look back now, I don't believe in demons, and I mean, I do and I don't,
Yeah.
but I did now after that, I really truly believe this person was possessed with some
Wow,
more than just one energy in the body. There was
really?
something else inside there, something else attached, and a little bit of that grabbed onto me, and took me a while to get that out of my soul, if you will, out of my out of my energy, if you will. It's
And
very interesting.
how did it manifest? Were they were they like insulting, or just they had a deep dark side, or you just a feeling?
Super, super dark. I mean, their whole life existence was pretty brutal. Um,
Wow.
Punched and kicked when they were in the mother's womb, drop kicked, allegedly, these are stories, right? Allegedly drop kicked across the floor in the nursery at the hospital. Father
Jesus.
was arrested. Um, yeah. And so just the trauma this person went through, um, and then somehow, somewhere in there was not a good human as well, which is the
Yeah, well,
strange part. It's one of the few people I met that was not a great person. And it was partly because that person was picked. I was supposed to interview somebody else that day, but this
Right.
person, the person I was supposed to interview, substituted this person who they had met and
Mm.
brought home like a stray cat.
Right.
And so I was a little so it was the only person who didn't go through the actual process that we had, which is attracting people in the right place, in the right state of mind, which I didn't realize what we were doing. The way we had done it, we were getting people that had been through tough stuff, but were in a place where they were happy to share it.
Yeah.
They were a little bit more stable. And this
Right.
person was still in deep in trauma and still, in a dark place. Whew, had to shake that one off, man. Something very interesting. It's real, Buki. I met somebody and I was that close, and like I said, somebody a little bit glommed onto me is my slang. I don't know if that's British or not, but a guy glommed onto me, and it was. There were times when I was like, "Dang, man, I can't. I gotta shake that off of me
Yeah.
because it's a dark energy and not a good energy." Yeah, it's real. Let's do one question before we close, and then I'll get you
Yeah.
to wrap up.
Sure.
To give us a little wrap up. I want to shake off that memory.
Yeah. Don't want
even
into trouble.
even invoking that memory gives me a little bit of willies.
Mm.
Okay, so another question from the jar for Buki. Kind of last one, Buki, and then maybe we'll kind of get you to share this into a wrap.
Mm.
Are you good at asking people about themselves, like you just asked me about myself?
Yeah.
Do you feel you're good at asking people about themselves?
No, I think I would say without without
Yeah.
blowing my trumpet, I
Yeah.
actually that's something that I am. In fact, I think that's helped me
Yes.
because as a as a as a sales guy, I was very consultative in my approach, and that's all about eliciting information
Hmm.
so that you can position your solution as to how you
Yeah.
can add value and so forth. So I was very good about asking people what they think, how they think, why they're doing it this way,
Yes.
etc. And I think that's transferred to the whole
Yeah.
to the consulting world and my diversity think tank and understanding different people, different perspectives. In fact, women, interestingly enough, had such a positive impact on me because I got an insight into gender bias, and I
Oh.
realized that I can never really understand this. But what I can do
Oh,
is show
such a good
people how to address it, but deal with it. But I can't understand, the nuances of it, how
yeah.
we men miss, how we can be, or misogynistic is strong, but sexist definitely.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, we miss it. So that helped me with formulating my own methodology, which comes from
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that's an interesting insight
Mm.
because being in a group where you are, you can be discriminated against or have a bias against, and then
Yeah,
to meet another group that you don't
yeah,
and realizing, "Oh, I can't actually fully comprehend it."
yeah, yeah. And a lot of people when it comes to race and stuff, that's the kind of
Yeah,
that's a
yeah.
similar problem that
Yeah,
people
yeah.
can't
So
see.
it gave you your point of view, you're able to stand in both camps.
Yeah, and then as a result, it's interesting because I then wrote an article for something called like this magazine, online magazine, got like 3 million. It's got like 3 million views. It's called The Female Lead. They asked me to write an article, so I was able to write that article because it's spoken to women. So anybody can go and check it out. If you put Buki Mosaku femalelead.com, they'll see it, and it's got my take on
Uh
how to navigate gender bias. There you go. So yes, in
That's
short, I think I'm all right at asking questions.
oh, I have so many things I want to say, but it's so unpolitically correct. We'll chat after.
Yeah,
How about some closing thoughts, Buki? For the audience and anything you want to, make sure people can find you and et cetera.
yeah. Well, I tell you what, if I wanted to leave the audience with something, and I'll come on to where they can get me. But what if they find me? If I wanted to leave some, when it comes to navigating workplace bias, because we're talking about
Yeah.
workplace issues,
Yes. Yeah.
right? The first step to effectively navigating unconscious workplace bias, right, is accepting the multi-directional nature. That is accepting it's a two-way street. If we can accept it's a two-way street, we're going to help ourselves for many reasons. But the major reason is when we accept that unconscious bias in the workplace is a two-way street, we're accepting that we're all the same. We're accepting that we're all the same. And when we accept that we're all the same, we allow for our misinterpretations. And when we allow for our misinterpretation, we can navigate it. And that starts with just simply saying some variation of I don't understand. That's it, when you sense it. So accepting the multi-directional nature, that's the gift I want people to take. In terms of finding me, you can find me on at bukimosaku.com. Right?
Okay.
That's BUKIM for mother, OS for sugar, AKU.com. And you can contact me at info@bukimosaku.com. I'm on LinkedIn and all the socials.
Yes, you are.
And also, I got a gift. I got a gift for your guys. I got a gift for those people, right? If you go to navigatingbias.com, there is a free assessment, right? It's called a bias, I don't know. Did you go to Harvard? Do you know? Have you heard of the Harvard implicit bias test?
Oh, no.
Well, you're not missing anything, right? Right. Well, I've got the Mosaku's bias navigation test.
Oh, I'm gonna take that. Actually, I'm gonna go and try that.
Yeah, try it, and it's like 90 seconds or maybe a bit more, and it will tell you your perspective on bias and where you look, how you look at it, and give you ideas for how you can address it as an individual or as a company. So that's my gift. But if you want to talk to me, and I encourage you to talk to me, LinkedIn or bukimosaku.com, info@bukimosaku.com, and all the socials.
Buki, awesome to meet you and to get to know you, hear your story. Really appreciate you taking time. Especially your evening from London with us on The Humanist.
It's been a pleasure, Ken. It's been a pleasure talking to a humanist. Yeah,
it's been great. It's been great. Hang around for 10 seconds and I'll see you on the other side.
Okay.
Thanks everybody for listening and supporting The Humanist. If you're on an audio version, drop down, give us a couple stars. And if Buki and I said something that really upset you, write us a note and we'll probably write something back to leave it upset you even more. See you on the other side. Welcome to the Humanist Podcast. I'm your host, Ken Stearns. Join us on a journey where we unravel the intricacies